we don't use the internet, only the devil will use the internet.
All right, good afternoon. This week, I have the pleasure to be joined by Jim Bob of Made by Jim Bob fame. He is a satirist, a musician, and a cartoonist, as well as a YouTube content creator. Jim Bob, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, man. I've been following your work for a little while. I believe I saw you for the first time on the Church of the Eternal Logos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a very interesting conversation.
Which one was that? I've been on like 3 times. I love talking to David Patrick. Yeah.
It was the most recent one. I guess it was
Okay.
maybe a month ago, something like that. Yeah, I tuned into that in the middle of the gym, and it was just a really entertaining conversation, and I've been following you ever since.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that channel. Love that guy. He does really good work.
He really does. Yeah. So I guess to start us off, would you mind giving us a little bit of a background of yourself and the work that you're doing on YouTube, and have your Instagram up here, and I'll be sure to put all your links and stuff in the description of the video when we're all finished.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a political cartoonist. I guess comedy. I do music and stuff too. I try to combine it all into one. And I started drawing cartoons politically like 5+ years ago when I was living in LA, and I had a totally different worldview. I had the default sort of liberal Democrat, cultural nihilist kind of,
Yeah.
I voted for Obama, and like, I was just a part of a collective basically. But then I started criticizing Obama, and then I saw that that simple form comics, 1 to 3 frames, if the content was true and provoking, it could really do some interesting things in the internet sphere. And so I just started pursuing that, and then I just kept going. And then it is interesting is doing cartoonings. If you're honest, it actually is a form of doing soul searching philosophy work, internal work, because you have to kind of look at it and go, is that true? Or how, to what extent is that true? And is it really showing something or revealing something? And you could do that in a weak way, you could do that in a very superficial way, I guess, but that wasn't an option for me. So I just went for it. And it really kind of pushed me into further investigation of a lot of things that aren't just cultural. It pushed me, it actually, my cartooning played a role in actually bringing me back to faith. So it's an interesting way of going about it, but I guess that's not up to us sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And now I'm censored, basically censored. I have a running gig at the Washington Examiner. I do a weekly cartoon for them, which is cool. And they take some fun stuff. They don't take the most provoking stuff, but that's fine. And then other than that, I'm on my 4th Instagram account. They no longer give me reasons why they delete me. And, so that's just how that goes.
Yeah. Well, I think that says something. It's they don't need to censor people who aren't speaking the truth. If you're on the right path, then you're going to meet, opposition for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's like, it's the truth that's revealed or talked about, but it's also like another layer of it is like, if you talk about things in a certain framework, even if you're saying something true, but it's only within a certain very controlled range of discourse, they almost permit it. You know what I mean? Like the authorized right, we can call it, that they keep things in this sort of like weird binary sort of dialectic. And that's very safe because because that lends itself to watching politics like a sports game,
Mhm.
and then it allows people to consume it and participate a little bit and give their thumbs up and stuff. But when you get into more, I guess you get into more complex ideas, or maybe if you push people towards something as true as, in my view, as true as God, as Christ is living, pursuing communion, then it's too sharp almost. It's like too rigorous. It's like too true. And then it's not good. It's not good for the muddy internet sphere because it's too narrow. And
Yeah.
it's interesting that the internet doesn't actually lend itself to narrow, sharp cutting truth. And I think that's where you really see it. It's not, it's like wholesomeness, yeah, but even sharper. If you cut even sharper and point to the truth, and you identify the truth with a being, if truth is a person, then it's too much. It's almost too much for even like just modern broad Christianity. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like, no, that's going to really, polarize us now. Like,
Right.
can't we just stick together in a sort of blended, sort of Vitamix, vague, sort of like theology community or whatever?
Yeah.
And it's just the work that I do is the more I push, the more it gets isolated and reduced down, and that's like, to me, even has an effect on me where it's like, what else would there be to talk about? If you keep, it's like scary for me, because it's like, how much can I just comment on sort of superficial silliness, absurdity, and culture if I know it's just worldliness? Like, it's almost like being able to classify it. You're no longer surprised by it, but then you sort of run out of, I don't know if you run out of wit. You just go like, oh, that's that thing again in a different form. You know what I mean? And it's like, how many times can we comment on it? How many times
Right.
can we point to worldliness if it can be categorized just as that?
Yeah, it's like spraying the fire extinguisher at the flames and not the fire. But once you go right to the fire, you're cutting through everything so deep that it shocks people too much. It's like,
Right.
whoa, we were okay with just kind of like making fun of these things that we see in the news, but when you get to the heart of it, it's like too much for some people.
Right. And that's the same for, say, maybe using scripture versus like intellectualizing a broader theological worldview or something philosophically. You know what I mean? And I fall victim to that too. I'm vulnerable to, intellectualizing and stuff, and it gets interesting and you can look at it from different angles. But like my mom says, like when you go to like scripture, it just cuts through everything. It's the sharpest way to say what you're saying.
Yeah.
To say what you're trying to say, it cuts through and it reduces it down to like, very short syllables. In fact, I saw a study that the Bible has it's the most, what's the word? It's the most condensed body of work that has the most shortest amount of syllables.
Really?
And it's not an accident, because when you reduce, like I read a book on writing, and it had nothing to do with like Bible or philosophy or anything. It had to do with technical writing and how to enhance and make your writing more effective and clearer. And one of the first chapters was about how you reduce the amount of words you're using. First of all, you leave anything that's unnecessary out, right? That's just basic editing principles. But then you also try to get your words a little bit smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So something that's this much, I have this much to say. If you can say it like this, and that lends itself to my work, because it's like I draw a crude picture, and my job is to reduce everything that's being said in a tiny bubble, if not sometimes no dialogue.
Yeah.
But in this book, it mentioned the Bible specifically as one of the most epic examples of using the least amount of words in each given section to say the most.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because like you mentioned, doing comics is, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And a really effective image says way more than one could say with a huge essay. You know, if you have an effective image that cuts to truth, all you need is that picture, and it just says it all.
Right.
You know, some of the work that you've done recently, even some of the ones that don't have too much text, like you have this transhuman one that I really like, where the person just eventually becomes a mainframe.
Yeah, totally.
And it's just like, yep, there you go.
Right.
Really entertaining.
Thanks.
Hopefully I can edit in some of your comics to this video that we're doing, because they're hilarious.
Thank you.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I'm an artist myself, and you know, I really enjoy your style. That the way you kind of like have like this very simple image format. I admire it because it's actually very challenging to do stuff like that. You know, especially as you know, if you get classically trained, or you work in the entertainment sphere like I do. You know, you're always trying to hit crazy quality bars and high level imagery and all of this stuff, which takes an eternity. But one of the beautiful things about comic art, and especially yours, is like, it's, you know, you can make these in a timely manner, and it just does exactly what it needs to do.
Right.
You know, you don't get all wrapped up in like, well, is the perspective and everything perfect? Like, not important. What's important is the message that's coming through in the comic. And I really like that.
Yeah. I'm actually fortunate, because I could take time and make really realistic shading work. And I'm not trained like going to school, but I can do it. And but it's not, I pursued that for a little, and it never drew me anywhere, because I had nothing to say with it other than, can this look really good? You know, but then if everyone can do that and nothing's being said, it becomes like, what was that? There was a documentary about a guy who spent 10 years drawing the most detailed version of Marilyn Monroe, right? He spent 10 years drawing, and he was really good. It was at the level where it was like, it looked like a photograph, right? But something interesting about art, and I don't know if it applies to all art or just visual art, is that, you know, if you focus too much on that, the irony is that not only is less said, but the person viewing it isn't actually as amazed the closer you get it to reality. It just goes like, it's like, oh, that looks like a picture, that's amazing, but that's it, you know. And then like, you know, like you're amazed by the quality and the, you know, the detail, but it doesn't, because it doesn't move anything internally about personhood or life or struggle or any of the, you know, sort of, I guess, the transcendental category itself of all human experience. The experience itself is, wow, that's incredible. That the artist is like a machine. But isn't that crazy that as we elevate our abilities, if they're not given in the context of something transcendental that moves the soul, then they're just, the irony is that it just occurs as robotic. We become closer to a robot, even though the work itself is astoundingly good, right? Or you know, technically amazing. It's just an interesting thing. It just demonstrates that if the other part, the metaphysical part, isn't embodied in the thing, you know, and there's a connection to the person, and then maybe a story to the person, and so forth, then it's just lost. It's just like the uncanny valley of art, where you're just like, it's good, but who? It's just like I said in the beginning, like, that seems true, but who is truth? Who? I always think about that. I even think about that with morality, how, you know, I've spent so many years asking the question, what is the basis of morality? And I've only come to, in the last 2 or 3 years, that the only logical way of asking is who is the standard of morality? Not, it can't be a what, you know, it can't be a what. And I think this is also true of beauty, compassion, the whole list of things that we can't find in nature, in material. It's a who question. It can't be a what. What is inanimate? What's our nouns? They're objects. It's matter. They're causally effete. They don't do anything. They have no causal effect on us. And so it seems obvious to me. And that's part of what pushed me back to Christianity. I actually think that no one actually ever leaves Christianity if they know it.
Yeah.
They pretend, they
Yes.
suppress, but they don't
That's,
leave.
man, that's my experience 100%. You know, like I was raised Catholic, and I I fell away because the world was so much more sparkly, and you know, it really is very alluring. But in the back of my mind, um, I always had those stories and that way of looking at the world. And thank God I did, because you know, I could have gotten up to so much worse. But when you actually go out and live, and you realize you're living stories, you're living through patterns, you know, eventually you have to stop lying to yourself. You have to, or else you'll always be lost. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
I totally understand. You know, because you said you lived in LA, right? I lived in LA from 2002 to 2007 ish, something like that. And yeah, you know, I completely fell away, and I was just with a bunch of other people who were actively lying to themselves. You know,
Yeah.
everyone's lying to themselves.
Totally. And it's like something you said is the story and the patterns we live in. This is what's interesting about it, is that when you fall away and you pretend that you're creating reality, and you're writing I'm writing my story, an Oprah kind of way
Yeah.
of looking at, you're always borrowing from something that must be necessarily true to start to begin with. You couldn't possibly write a story, your own story. So that part is such an illusory lie. Like it's like you're not actually. To me, the only logical conclusion is there's only one story, and that we're in, and that one story needs to be grounded in something absolute and true and ultimate. And inside of that, yeah, we have little changes in our lives, and things happen differently to us, and we do things differently to other people. And those are particulars, but in the end, none of us are creating any sort of new reality
Right.
for ourselves or others. Only maybe circumstances. If someone wants to redefine reality as circumstantial, then fine. But I'm talking about the fundamental nature of reality, the fundamental preconditions for all experience. We like to borrow them. You know, the atheists, when we all go through that phase, we like to just look away and go, no, I'm going to start with the absolutes. I'm going to start with meaning and language and math and the regularity in nature, and the fact that we can all communicate seamlessly, near seamlessly with each other. And it's just that's just how it is. You know,
Right.
it's like when you say, like, when you start calling out your own nonsense and your lies, that was one of the lies I called out on myself, was like, oh, I'm borrowing. I can't possibly live a life and argue a worldview seriously and simply ad hoc borrow all of the preconditions for existing.
Yeah.
I can't just be like, yeah, no, that just is. I can start from, and I think that was the problem, you know, not to get into too much of the philosophical stuff, but like it seems like the Enlightenment sort of was like, took us from acknowledging the creator and diving in, like, who is the creator? Oh,
Yeah.
we're endowed with all this stuff. Great, broad. Who? What?
Right.
How does this work? No, they just said, no, we don't need that. You know, like, let's just let's move forward to the constitutionalism, and we'll just write a cool thing with the feather pens, and then we'll just go from just ad hoc starting position. And that way libertarians and all these different versions of philosophies can come together with this one starting assumption, but none of them have to justify the starting assumption.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's the whole problem with the materialist worldview, is that you take for granted metaphysics. You say there are no metaphysics, but as the illustrious Jay Dyer has said, that in itself is a metaphysical statement. Saying
Totally.
there are no metaphysics, you know, you just made a metaphysical claim.
Right.
You know, and when that occurred to me, it was a complete change of perspective. And like, well, yeah, we take all of these things for granted. We take the fact, everything leading up to the fact that we exist, we just take for granted. Like, oh, of course we are, you know, and it just completely upends everything up until the Enlightenment, like you were saying. You know, and now we see the situation that we're in based on those incorrect starting principles.
Totally. And you could see if you allow it, if a culture allows it and doesn't push on those points, then you can get into sort of this contrived, like you could, in other words, you can permit more social constructs and accept them as like these like sort of temporal states of affairs that you can change and manipulate, and it could apply to gender or this or that. Simulation theory, like all of these things are now viable, even though they're really not. They're only viable if you start from an assumption and argue that you don't have to justify starting assumptions, which is this axiomatic nonsense that sounds really wordy and flashy, but it's absolutely silly. Like it's like funny that an axiom is just everyone else's convenient way of starting with a bunch of things they don't have to justify. And the definition of axiom is basically something you don't have to justify, which is just another axiom. And then you're like, and I talked to Jay about this on a Discord once, and I was pointing to how silly that is, because if someone goes, it's an axiom, I don't have to justify it. And you're like, by definition, if the definition of axiom is something you don't have to justify, then that second axiom, the definition, assumes something else is true beyond the axiom. If it's true, you know what I mean? It doesn't work. It falls apart. And then someone might go, no, it's just, they'll say something like it's in the analytical category or something like that. They'll just explain it away. But these are the things, like you said, that once you confront them, and it's not for everyone. Some people just have a direct experience, from God, of God, humility, something really deep that alters how they see all things. And sometimes that's paired with just like a philosophical rock hitting you in the head. In philosophy, can't get you to God, like reasoning itself. You can't you can't do a Jordan Peterson to God, which is important. And then I remind myself that, because the reason I make fun of Jordan Peterson so much is because I have a version of him in me that's like, that goes toward that fluff talk. And then,
I experienced the same thing. Like I try not to tease Jordan Peterson, even though he's very teasable, because he was he was an important step for me in like 2014. So I think that he can be useful, but you're right. Like there is a part of everyone, I think, who listens to him and follows along with that too brainy, too philosophical, too analytic part of things, where, you can kind of get into the logical philosophy of it, but getting to God requires participation and faith and things that are not simply like your rational faculties.
Right.
Yeah. And I love your Jordan Peterson impression, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
So great.
Yeah, I used to go pretty hard because I was the same as you. I really jumped on board him maybe right after sort of Ben Shapiro. Those guys allow you to use them as a raft away from sort of liberal democracy. I call libertarianism or classical liberalism, which most of the right actually is now, is just classical liberals, as the life raft away from the sinking lefty ship. And then you're like safe because you're not a Republican. You're just you're in the middle. And that's why these people are so alluring to center right, libertarians, anarchists. They get to have and borrow metaphysics through Jordan Peterson's heuristic, or his Christian skeleton that he slaps sort of Jungian flesh to. And it works for people, but works is pragmatic, and sometimes faith isn't pragmatic. Sometimes morality isn't useful. Sometimes it's not useful to your needs or goals or wants at the time. And so that's where it all falls apart. But I used to be a little more harsh on him, and now I'm a little softer, because I do see that's a human being. He struggles spiritually, clearly, admittedly. And he's also in a position where he's rewarded for staying ambiguous. So it's that's his battle.
When your paycheck is dependent on it, it's pretty tough.
And you could argue from that perspective, for any one of us who maybe start from there before we come to our grappling with God. If you're already at that status, right? It's like you could probably argue in your head that, well, no, I'm going to stay here. I won't get to the truth really publicly, but I'll do more good by staying in a safer place and not speaking clearly, in other words. And then you could argue, oh yeah, well, I could reach more people and I could be the bridge. I could be the bridge for the same way I was the bridge for Patrick and many other people, right? I'll serve as the bridge. And you could see how someone can, justify that in their head. But maybe he really can't get to the answer in his head. Like, or maybe he can't get the answer because he's trying to get to it through his head.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
That's a
not
good
that.
point.
It's just faith. It's humility. It's faith. It's something, in my experience, it's impossible to reason in an argument. Like you can argue, you can make arguments that are good for faith in God. You can make but there's this irony. It's almost like a libertarian joining the government to argue against the government. You're using reason and philosophy to try to argue or prove God doesn't work because God's is personal. It's something. I would argue that intuition itself might be even a better argument for God because it's not in propositional form. There's no like, if this, then, like when you get into that world, you end up failing because you're in debate. You're in like this very, again, we're in that form, you're borrowing all of these things in order to debate. There's truth. We ought to be logically consistent. All of these oughts are not actually embedded in the argument for God in that propositional nerdy logic debate, right? That we see in our culture now. And so I've actually only recently discovered that, even though it's kind of known inherently, just in practice, you realize, oh, there's a certain level of debating that's absolutely foolish and antithetical to practicing faith. And sometimes it's necessary. Like we're actually instructed through scripture to basically demolish all arguments that don't make personal thoughts personal to God, to Christ, actually. I forgot what the scripture was. It's really good though, because it basically permits us to argue, to debate, but in the form, it's not in the form that we see in like the intellectual dark web. It's basically personal. It's not like this format where it's like, you must make an assertion and I will now refute you. It's like in personal combat. It's with our words. It's with our words. Yeah. In like scripture, it's how do I explain it? It's like, it's not presented in this like format when you're on like a screen and you're doing a debate format. It's like in our interactions with human beings directly. That's like the real format for spiritual warfare.
Yeah, that rings true, especially with what you were saying about, earlier, like it's all who. It's a person. Like compassion is not an object, it's how you act. Right. So it all does get back to interpersonal relationships, how we live with one another, and ultimately how Christ taught us to live, how he lived.
Right. And ultimately people will see who Christ is through Christ-like people. Like,
Right.
And that's the way. It's person to person. It's not one like David Patrick put so well. It's not a one to abstract many John Lennon YouTube Oprah thing where it's like, love everyone. You're like, yeah, kind of, but who? Like, like that's why knowing people and their personhood and their energies and such actually gives us our context to interact with them. And it gives us a time frame too. Like, in other words, if you know someone, how aggressive you can be with any given topic. How aggressive you can be with scripture. How patient you need to be. How compassionate you need to be. And these things are not necessarily conducive to the internet world, where if someone says something heretical, it's easy to just be like, just attack. But if you know the person, it's different. It's like knowing your brother. If your brother falls away, it's not this like, expose, I'm going to expose my brother now. It's like, oh, okay, I know him, and so the only way to change someone's heart, first of all, you can't judge the heart, but if you sense that the heart is the thing that's not moving, it's by person, it's interaction. It's like they see something you have access to, basically, and then they want it. It's ultimately the real true liberty, not the fake liberty, not the constitutional liberty, not the I have private property liberty, the Michael Malice liberty. No, liberty is ultimately a spiritual thing, spirit liberty. So
definitely. Absolutely. That's some good stuff. That's some good stuff, sir. Let's change a little bit. We've been talking a lot about Christianity and God and Jesus. And you said that you were an atheist or at least agnostic at some point when you were in LA.
Yeah, I could. I would say that we can colloquially refer to me as that, but I actually reject that anyone can actually be an atheist, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, well, I mean, you make a good point there, because even when I thought I was an atheist, it wasn't that I didn't believe in God, it's I didn't want to believe in God.
Yeah. In other words,
that's it. Yeah.
For the sake of just labeling, yes, I would say I would have called myself an atheist then, but now looking back, I know that's not true, and I don't know how important it is to keep those labels strict, because really, when it comes down to it, you really do see that nobody's religiously neutral at all. There's no religious neutrality.
Right.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So
yeah. You have an idol, right? If you don't have God, you have some kind of idol. Yeah. And something that stood out to me maybe like 5 or 6 years ago was like, people who don't have God, I realized that they have religious inclinations just to all sorts of different things, that everybody's got a religion. But if it's not God, it's something else. It's their politics, it's their vices, their addictions, their interests, So yeah, I think that you're right. I think, and I've interacted with a number of people who claim to be atheists who are, like the old saying goes, there's no atheists in foxholes. I know atheists who have cried out to God in their darkest moments. And like one friend of mine, he's like, I realized I thought I was dying and I was praying to God and I didn't even believe in God, but there I was praying to him.
Yeah, it's innate. It's like you can't reject that you were created. It's impossible. That's right. Yeah, because it's required, because it's a logical necessity for reason itself. So so you can't escape it. So it's like, I mean, really, once you see how absurd it is, in order to reject God, you need to borrow the mind of God. Otherwise, you can't justify rejecting God. Like, people don't realize how important that one little problem is with materialism, is that you can't justify your reasoning for the disbelief in God because you're borrowing something according to your own worldview. You can't justify the inerrancy of, or the validity of, or the source of. It's, we're just chemicals smashing together. I don't believe in God. What? So wait, so why would you call it I don't believe in God? Why wouldn't you just call it I'm having thoughts about things that ultimately I can't know to be true, nor can anyone know to be true, and I might not even be separate from you. It just goes into solipsism, you know what I mean? And I think once you see the absurdity of that, again, I was an atheist, but really my God was myself, and my God was the world, my desires, my fleshly desires, and that was my God. The experience. I worship the experience, man. That was my
absolutely. God. Would you mind going into a little bit about how you got out of that? You said it was kind of through some of your artwork and doing these things, but would you mind telling us a little bit about your path back to Christianity?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I was in LA for 15 years doing
I'm sorry.
everything you do in LA, entertainment and all that.
Yeah.
And then I met Megan, as I had a failing store, a jewelry. I'm a jeweler. I'm a metalsmith by
Oh,
trade.
that's
I
cool.
just actually left that to go full time into whatever you call this.
Yeah.
So I had a store, it's failing. And then, we actually, got pregnant pretty quickly. And so, but even at that point, I was still rejecting God. I was rejecting everything. I was like, nothing's real. I'm free. There's no labels, that kind of thing. That doesn't last very long, especially with a child. And so I don't know. I can't say that having a child itself automatically was like God exists, because if you're numb to it, you still won't see that. You won't see the child and be like, wow, everything I thought was true is not necessarily true. What it does do, though, at least, on a certain level, is that once you have a child, if you're smart and reasonable, you'll let go of all the things you don't necessarily need that are just nonsense. So things that you're just not invested in and you never thought about it. In other words, having a child can act like a strainer to your life. And so only what's necessary comes through. And I think that's the starting point, at least, where I not only isolate relationships and behaviors I no longer need to be a father, but I start to see, well, I have a child now. And so ultimately I have to teach my child something I actually believe. And so I think a really good barometer for what you actually believe is having a child, because you need to believe what you're teaching your child. Like you start to go, oh, am I really telling someone this, that it has my guidance? I'm their umbrella. Like, so you start thinking about that. And I think it was my push or being ridiculed when I first did my first comics, attacking Obama and that lefty culture, which I was a part of. People were just so angry at me. And I was like, oh, well, this isn't the right ideology for me. So I went ideology searching. And then I went to the middle, and I went to classical liberalism, and then I stayed safe on the libertarian raft. And then I basically started dealing with the fact that I was just suppressing my religious inclinations, my past relationship with God. Like, even if your past relationship with God is flawed in the way you pray, if you're praying from a result-based negotiation, like you're on the phone with a bank teller asking you to reverse the charges, or if God, then this happens, if prayer, then this happens. It was all flawed. And I realized, okay, so my rejection of God is based on my rejection of what was missing in being raised religiously and not having a philosophical, logical context for interacting with scripture itself. Like all of these. So it led me down to philosophy again, which can be dangerous. Philosophy can actually lead you away from God too.
Yeah. So
there's this weird thing where, you acknowledge philosophy and its limitations, but you can use it to get you to coherency. So I was seeking coherency, whether I knew it or not, at some point, and going away from politics and going into, there was this transition where I went from politics, who's right politically and culturally, to the truth as the thing I was pursuing and loving. And I was like, oh, I'm in love with the truth. And so being in love with the truth, all those other games dissolve, because you don't have a red jersey or blue jersey all of a sudden, you have a different jersey. It's the truth. So anybody can be attacked. So not only was that freeing for me in what I do, cartooning, shining light on absurdity, I don't have any loyalties to worldly teams. I'm outer worldly. So it was freeing, but then you still have to justify that. You can have that experience. I transcend all these. A lot of people do that. There's New Agers who go, I transcend politics, but they don't get to the truth, what's required to coherently love the truth. The truth is not an object. You can't love an object. You can't love a concept. The truth has to be a being. And so, with the help of my mom, who's very scripturally based, and I started looking like, oh, it's not, it's necessary. It's, how do I say this? You have to love the truth and then ground the truth and realize at some point that it's a person, it's a personhood. There's something that the standard for not, it's not just God. God has to be knowable.
Right.
You know what I mean? So once I started pursuing God and theology and interacting with Jay, I think Jay played a big role too. It's just funny, this dichotomy, by the way. Interacting with and becoming friends with Owen Benjamin removed me from the political context and got me into a general religious sphere.
Mm-hmm.
And Jay got me into a more direct pursuit of who God is and why that's necessary if you're going to believe in God, is to eventually pursue to know him. It can't just be the luminaries. It can't just be the trees and the earth and oneness, right?
Right.
So pursuing that, I just logically came to the conclusion it has to be a being, it has to be a knowable being. And there's, in my view, there's no reason why, actually I would argue from the absurdity of the contrary, if God didn't reveal himself as man, as something in flesh, then we couldn't really know the story. We couldn't know anything, actually.
Yeah.
God would just be sort of like the Jewish version. It would just be like this, like distant, mist, like a nebulous, like, oh, like maybe the smoke eventually forms a hand, in the sky. Oh, that's God. And so I guess a lot of that pursuit, along with my work, because all of those questions went into my work. Like it went from like making fun of leftism, which is really easy, going to philosophy and worldviews, and so making fun of like all sorts of worldviews, which I still do. And being able to do that, sharply and effectively, I think also gave me more confidence and in defending what I believe. And so they kind of go hand in hand, because I'm, I hope I'm doing something, God's work through my work, as provocative as it is. And sometimes it's crude, and sometimes, sometimes it's foul, but ultimately I think that's where it's trying. My attempt is to have it grounded in something beyond commentary, So, and that's like, I don't know if it's possible to actually make a 1-to-1 ratio of God to work in the world. I think the attempt is there, but I don't think it's possible to do it.
Yeah, I agree.
But we can try. And so that's it. It's like my version of sculpting is this weird, crude, silly art. It's like my version of the statues that they used to, try to, capture God's absolute greatness in an icon, in a thing, in an arch, and so it is bizarre to look at it that way, though, because a lot of beauty is like symmetry and math, and there's something ultimately grounded in the structure of things, whereas my stuff is crude and messy and thick lined and not symmetrical, and but yet there's something, I guess, true enough about it that it represents,
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's all sorts of different ways of breaking down art, like you were saying, symmetry, the math behind it, what's beautiful, what's not, what's an impressionistic image versus what is a super realistic image. But therein, it's all pointing to some truth, right? And like you were saying earlier, that's a great picture of Marilyn Monroe. You did a great job of recreating life on a page, but is it empty? What is it actually saying? What's the greater message behind it? And I think that is actually what is completely missing in all of modern art. and not just modern art in like like a spotlight on a toilet or something, none of that. Just the modern art that gets produced in entertainment, media, and all of these things that, we have the technology to like recreate reality basically, but it's all empty and hollow. There's no greater truth. There's no beauty. There's nothing really being said. So I think that it's very impressive to me that with very stylish, simplified imagery, you can say way more than, multi-million-dollar projects are able to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That whole art thing is really, I mean, Jay goes into the psyop of that kind of modern art and why it's useful to just diluting everything, just turning everything upside down, inverting things, changing it. It's empty, but it's also trying to invert and change things. There's something I realized about art itself. It's like, there's this push, I guess, since the 60s or something, maybe even before, like Dadaism, what, in the 20s, 30s, that if you make art, ultimately, like there's this point at which you don't have to say anything. It was like this shift from saying something to not needing to say it. And if you don't need to say anything, then you don't need to defend anything. It just is what it is, man. Right. And then you're like, what is this? And you're like, whatever you want it to be. And it's like, it puts the artist in a safe environment to not be ridiculed by what they're saying. But not to say that modern art, there aren't modern artists that don't try to say something, provocative and like, piss on an icon or something, you know what I mean? Like they do things, but generally it's this, I did this, you guys determine what you get from it. Nobody can be wrong about it. And then you don't have to put the artist on the spot and defend it. It's just art, man. And a lot of artists do that. They just do a safe, or they'll do nihilistic comics where it's like, it just appeals to the self-hating nature of man, and that it's safe and it's repetitive. And then you're never really taking a stand for something. Because when you do take a stand for something, whether it's through your voice or your writing or your art or whatever you're doing, then you get ridiculed because you're actually saying one is one.
Yeah.
And then, and you're saying this is true. And then you go, oh, this is true. Oh yeah. How can you say that's true? There's so many other ways of looking at it. And it's like, I believe the purpose of God giving artists, specifically the gift of voice, song, writing, drawing, sculpting, is to reveal. It's revelatory. It's like, it's to have God work through you to say God's word, basically, in your unique way.
Yeah.
And when you say the truth in whatever form you're doing, you get ridiculed, especially in today's upside down world where, if you say the wrong direction, it's like the map today. There's no legend and there's no north or south. It's all any direction you want. It's just a map. It's just any direction. There's no up or down or left or right. It's just, the art is the map now, and everybody can make their own map, and it's all falling apart, and it's like culture today, including art. I said on a live stream before, I always use this reference, is that it's like if you were to have an art competition, right? And the teacher was like, the students were like, well, what's the standard? Like, what's the standard? What are the parameters? And they go, none. And they're like, well, it's a competition. And they're like, yeah. And they don't know how to win. There's no judging, right? There's no judge. So there's no judge. There's no judging. It's arbitrary if there was. But now you have a bunch of people in a room who are equivalent to society now, where they're competing for something, but they don't know what the standard is. And so the only place you can go is total inversion, shock, awe, degeneracy, the lowest form of existence said in the loudest way. Yeah. And that's what we see. It's this show. And the weird part is, the irony is that you're doing it. These people do this. And this is not just art. This is behavior. This is just how people are living. They're competing. They're seeking and desiring judgment, actually, which is interesting.
It's like children, right?
Exactly.
They want boundaries. They need to know where the boundaries are. So they're going to push until you show it to them.
Right. And they're
Yeah.
removing the boundary for this, and whether it's in art or film or behavior itself, or even in certain churches, removing the boundaries. You're just, it's a form of hell for people because they're seeking the structure,
Yeah.
and they're still behaving as if they're going to hit against the wall sometime, but they never get the wall. And then the wall is death, ultimately.
Yes.
And by death, I mean literal death, but also separation from God, like death. Separation from God is equivalent to not interacting with any universals or particulars, not having a reference for reality, ultimate reality, and not knowing, just ultimate nihilism, like real nihilism, not like nihilistic, I have a black hoodie nihilism, like nihilism, like nothing is coherent, like complete unintelligibility, and that's where we go. And I did a stream before, is that Christians especially, they get jarred by this, and it's like, it's scary, and they go, what about our children? And there's a level of protection we have to deploy. But at the same time, these people who pursue this wallless, boundaryless view of existence, it hurts them. Like, they have nothing to interact with. They can't build anything. There's nothing that's true. There's no foundation under them. So they start arguing, like for these insane things, like Disney recently, like this insanity of like, children need to know their sexuality at like 3. And we want to make our characters like non-binary. It's really important. They really believe that's towards something. Like, at the same time, they're arguing that everything's a construct, yet they're going towards something. Like, this is death. This is death. This is separation from God. And people have to understand that the moment we seek vengeance in our heart, and we all have it, like, oh, if we could just eliminate I mean, at least I'll admit it. There are primal carnal experiences I have that are far and few between, but they happen where I'm just like, oh, I understand why people want to eliminate people. Like, I'll go super dark. I won't ever contemplate it. It's just that it happens. And I go, oh, those people eliminate themselves. And it doesn't mean they necessarily are gone from the earth. It means that they're separate from God. And that itself is hell on earth, like hell before hell. And so you don't need to punish. You need to protect your children. I think you need to fight in our, as temporal as it is, fight for your immediate environment, and keep it as godly as possible. But again, you can't be separate. You can't be separate from the world ever, without death. So, but yeah, that boundary thing I think about a lot, where you remove. I did a talk with David Patrick Harry about that, and how we were talking about memetics, and how memetics isn't just like this modern idea of how ideas transmit and how they're related. Memetics ultimately, in a way, God creating from the word, right, is the world bound together by word, by language, by logos, by Christ, by the mind of God. These things are the only reason we're capable of interacting coherently, is because we have these things, these categories of things that we can't touch. They're invisible. All created things, all invisible and invisible. And so when you remove those or try to upend them or change them, you're basically restricting your own interaction with intelligibility. Like I said, that's like, to me, that's a form of hell. If I read Dante's Inferno again, and I wanted to edit a version of hell for myself, it would be absolute incoherence, unintelligibility, perpetually, just madness, And I think we see madness a lot.
I think you're right about that. Yeah, you made a really good point there. When I was thinking about what you were saying, when I was in art school, one thing I noticed was that we were working towards a goal that everyone could obviously see because we were all trying to get into the entertainment world, the media world. However, we all had professors who were of the mindset that there were no standards and there were no boundaries, but there obviously were, because you just look at video games and movies and you know what they need to look like. Yet we were, we had people who were steeped in that, like, oh, well, like, let's just look at Bastiat and like, it's beautiful. And I remember my first interaction with people who thought like that. It was in my graphic design class, my first semester of school. And he showed me, I think it was Bastiat. He showed me this drawing of like, it was drawn with like crayons, and it like it was this crazy, messy figure and a word, like I think it said lion, and it was pointing to him with an arrow. And I remember looking at it, and I was just like, I don't understand. How do I use this to create anything that I need to deliver and get paid for, and it needs to work in an environment like this is nonsense. Oh man, that was the wrong thing to say to that guy. I had like I scraped by in that class, and that guy hated me. But I was just asking, like, how do I use this practically? And they don't, it's
That's
like,
so funny, because the guy, that's actually the compliment to him, which is funny because he's making nonsense, and now he's offended that it's meaningless, even though meaninglessness is actually what he's going for. But if we call it meaningless, then it's suddenly an insult.
Right.
What's funny is that if you create meaningless, and this happens to a lot of people, probably Basquiat, any of those modern artists that were perpetuating meaningless stuff, they want to invert. I would even argue Bob Dylan to some extent was not, he wasn't necessarily trying to say too much. Like he was just doing something. And then when you're cornered about what it means, right, as the artist, then you either are sure in explaining it, or you hide and go, I don't know, draw your own meaning. But what's funny is all of those students that you went to school with, or any of these modern artists who, the irony is that you're creating nonsense, right, for the sake of just upending, like the upending meaning and true north and objective reality. Well, I want to defy it, man. And they defy it. But then as they proliferate and they become popular, right, this in itself is contradictory to the source of the material, right? So yeah, people start adding meaning to it, and then they have shows, and oh, he's a big deal, I want to get one of those paintings, and it's millions of dollars here and there, and culture and magazines, and the artist ends up deflating and basically resenting not only his culture, because now they're actually participating in the thing that the initial movement was rejecting, right? That there was order, that there was hierarchies, that there was meaning, that there was ultimate reality that your teacher is saying there isn't. And it's almost like it just shows that you can't get away from this, but also it shows the insanity of trying to pretend that you're even starting without it. You're lying. Like, no matter what you do, there's going to be a reference. Everything's theory laden. Everything you can't, unless the only way to truly be honest at, and I don't think this would work, is just making like fart sounds, like just total, because we will see just the same way we see a turtle in as the cloud is a turtle. Like, oh, look at that. Like, we are, because we have an intelligible mind operating, and the world is intelligible, and there's unity between concepts and the mind and the external world. There's no way around it. So anybody who's trying to still do this Dadaism, this upside down world inversion, I'm going to upend everything's a construct. They're just basically saying all is illusion, right? They're basically saying reality is illusion, and without realizing that something must not be an illusion for that to be true. So they're just incoherent. And it seems like incoherency, or the attempt to, has somehow been cool for maybe 100 years or something. Now we're reaching 100 years of incoherency is so cool, man. And I think we're at a turning point where people are drawing towards more coherency, where they're like, well, no, I want to stand in a firm position, you know.
Yeah,
I want to seek a firm position.
absolutely. That's a great way of putting it, because it's very similar to the experience that I've had on my journey to get where I am. I had to actually, if I wanted to argue my point, you know, when I started realizing everything was falling apart, like basically 2015, 2014, that era, when I was actually trying to make sense of what I was seeing happening in culture and in not just my industry, but also in politics and in greater worldviews, I had to start like arguing with myself, like, okay, if I'm going to say this, how do I defend it?
Right.
If I'm going to have an issue with your position, how do I defend my own position? And what do I really believe? You know, I was a libertarian for a very long time until I started trying to defend my position to much smarter people than me, or people who had very like drastic worldviews. And they would bring up, things like mostly leftists. They would start asking me like, oh, are you religious? Are you a religious person? I'm like, I don't think so. Like I kind of rejected that label at the time, until I started looking to defend my position. And I realized, well, I really can only defend this position going back to religion, going back to God. And then when that kind of clicked, I realized, well, I do think religiously. I do think like a religious person. And I see that there has to be a God for my position to hold any water. And I know when I was transferring through that, I went from a person who was libertarian, sort of left wing, not really giving a crap. You know, I could balance my checkbook, but I didn't care what you did with your social aspects, right? I was like a libertarian, fiscally conservative, socially liberal, right? But then I started realizing like this is completely unsustainable in all aspects of keeping a society together. Like I can't keep defending these positions when I see what the natural outcome of them are. I do think that people are more and more, as things get more absurd, are returning to or trying to find themselves in a position that they can sink their feet in and stand firm and make logical sense.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it all falls apart. If you come from the position, everything's a construct. It's funny. I get to make a comic of this. Everything's a construct. Next frame. No, not like that. It's like essentially what we're all finding at different time frames in our lives. And again, those of us who are lucky are seeded from birth with some form or some bridge to God, to the Bible specifically. And that if that's there, I just see there is this correlation of returning at some level. It's probably for most part shorter than people who are just raised as materialists. They're just like their parents are, you're a fishtail. You came from a rock. What's the meaning of life, Mom? Nothing. It's empty and meaningless, and there's nothing. You're just a speck, and you weren't created. It was just an accident. Oh, okay. Yeah. Where is that? Where are they going to go? Well, they can go to really dark areas, the upside is that it's incoherent. So we have to trust that because we're made in the image of God, that even the people born without the seed are going to find it out of the absurdity of the contrary, that they have to confront it. It's not an accident that all these atheists equate God, believing in God with believing in a unicorn or something, yet they don't write any books about the unicorns not existing.
Right.
They don't have 3 volumes of books about how unicorns don't exist, but yet it's the same. No, it's not the same, because they know that there's something deep in them that compels them to argue against something they say to themselves that doesn't exist. Imagine the insanity of spending your career arguing that something doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Okay. So what are you doing? No, it doesn't exist. You know.
And why are you getting so angry about it? Why if it doesn't exist and you know, why are you so angry? Why are you so vehemently angry about it?
Right.
And why yeah. I know when I was in that aspect, I got tricked into it, really, I think, as we all probably do, by, you know, these crafty
Harris.
yeah, like it was Christopher Hitchens for me.
Oh, Christopher, yeah, he's so eloquent and witty.
That's right. He had that accent and the way he spoke, and
he's actually likable. I actually like him. It's just that I'm just like, oh, you fool.
Right. Or you villain.
Yeah,
right?
You villain. Yeah.
Yeah, you villain.
Yeah.
But he was the, you know, those guys at the, you know, when I think YouTube first came on the scene in like 06, maybe 05, something like that. We were also having all the troubles with the Middle East, and the only people who were criticizing Muslim radicals were the atheists. And I think that was by design.
Yeah.
And, you know, they platformed the atheists who stood up to the Muslim radicals. But at the same time, they were also trying to get everybody on board with being an atheist. And they were attacking Christianity.
It was a atheist religious movement.
It was, yeah, that new atheist movement, for sure.
They call it the new atheist. It's the religious atheist movement. It's like, you know, like, it's so funny. Like, their worldview, and I don't know if any of these people actually confront this, or they just go, no. Like, to argue Muslim bad, even, you know, oh, Muslim bad, oh, this is terrible, like Sam Harris, oh, is it thinking you blow yourself up? It's like, based on your worldview, what is wrong with it? What are you talking about? You just said there's no free will, but yet you want people to stop blowing themselves up. How about, according to your view, they didn't blow themselves up? It was just not them. It was just some thing, you know, predetermined. So you see how silly I was captured by that whole crew. You know, it was so easy to do that because you're surrounded by people who never challenge you. Once you hit a smart person who goes, wait a second, let's just stick with your one claim. That's what it takes, actually. One claim. You just stick to it. You don't let them go off. You don't let them do a straw man or a red herring or try to, you know, do these like emotional appeals. Oh, you said you blowing people up or whatever. It's just, you just take their one claim. Like Richard Dawkins was on Joe Rogan. This is the problem with Joe Rogan, and I think it's also by design, is that, you know, Richard Dawkins will be like, Christianity is evil. I mean, there's nothing truly evil. Yeah, we are just dust specks. Yeah. And then it'll be like, it's Christians telling children they're going to burn in hell is evil, deeply immoral. And Joe Rogan's so dumb that he doesn't go, yeah, but why? Why would it be evil? You just said everything's meaningless. Like, he doesn't even think. He might be just so high that he doesn't think to do this, but it annoys me because that particular kind of interaction is the ultimate, objective, neutral platform. It's like, neutral, meaning nothing's contended ever. Like no philosophies are contended. It's just, you let them talk. And it's like, nobody's ever confronted Richard Dawkins except in debates, but debates are never seen. And that's the problem, is like this, the way these ideas are unveiled and then propped up by this sort of authorized sect, right? This atheist secular sect. No one ever confronts it, you know? And then if they do, it's these select people who confront it, like Ben Shapiro. And then you're like, no one wants to listen to him. Like, no one wants to hear him. I don't want him to defend my philosophy. Like, we don't even have the same. We don't
have the same worldview. Yeah.
So it's like, you know, that, I think you're right. I think it's by design. But at the same time, I just talked to my brother about this, how, like, we don't require such orchestrated psyops, right, for worldliness to be dominant in culture. You know what I mean? So in other words, if everyone is behaving basically just worship of the world and material and these kind of things from just a materialist standpoint, the outcomes will always be consistent with an outcome that would you would expect with like some deep rooted evil conspiracy. You know what I mean? Like, there isn't much difference in the outcome between the regular consequence of just a materialist view, just a worldly view, worldly activities, right? To me, there's not a big stretch between just worldliness, worldly activities and pursuits and desires, the whole full spectrum, and people who are evil, who are just going like, well, let's do this. They're just doing a different version of that. It's just a different magnitude. Now we're just discussing magnitude of pursuit of worldliness, because the people rubbing their hands going, I want to do this, they're still pursuing worldliness. So it's still the same to me. It's like, and so, I've let go of some of the attachments to needing a deep-seated, highly networked conspiracy, which I think exists, like world governments and so forth. And I don't know, certain aspects of powerful entities and groups working together. Yeah. But when it comes down to it, I think if you get a society that just pursues carnal desires, you basically have the outcome anyway. Like, you don't
Absolutely.
need some other thing going on, like in comic book style. You just have a society that values their direct carnal needs and desires, and then you just provide them. The evil cabal really is just like provide people with their carnal desires.
Yeah.
And try to promote that people should worship their will and do as they will and do this stuff and have no discipline. And that's freedom. And now you see this weird modern right where that's freedom.
Yeah.
That's freedom. Freedom is now equated. And again, before Enlightenment, freedom wasn't liberty, the way the feather pen people did it. Like, it wasn't property. It wasn't tied directly. It was discipline. You were liberated from your desire, the shackles of your desires and your ability to maintain power over your impulses. That was liberty as a man. It wasn't like you get to do whatever you want and go to Burning Man and it's liberty. It's like that's what's wrong with this whole right wing that's getting closer to a sort of Michael Malice worldview, which we should wholly reject.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's liberty is the discipline over your passions. It's what makes you a rational creature and not a beast. Absolutely. I know when I was basically a hedonist, there's no other way to really say it.
Right.
When I followed my passions and I lived for myself and all of these things, I was not happy. Like, I was not a happy person. I was actually a miserable person. I didn't know where I stood and I didn't know any path. Everything was random accidents and there was no patterns to anything. Things just happened. Right. I was just a mess. And I think that's why we see so many people on drugs and living lives that ultimately destroy them. And I'm with you on the idea that there doesn't necessarily have to be a cabal of people pushing things in a direction. All you need to do is really destroy the idea that there's a God in an ordered world and encourage people to follow their worldly passions, and they will do whatever it is that they want. Do I think that there is a small group who are thinking that way? Absolutely. I definitely believe that. But I don't think that everyone needs to be in on the plan.
No.
Not at all. You just need to, if you hire the person who believes the right way, and you just let them do what they're naturally going to be inclined to do from that thought process, and they'll make the mess for you. You don't have to tell them what to do. You don't have to micromanage all of these people. You just get, that person, is a worldly person, atheist, what have you. Perfect. We'll put them in that position and they will just sow chaos, because that is
totally. Or they'll sow false structures too. Like, there's the chaotic, like, cause, like, dismantle the fabric of reality, try to, but then there's, like, I would say, like, people are like, he's a shill, he's controlled opposition, or even if you say this to like a Ben Shapiro or something. No, I'm clear on what that guy values. So just like you said, you just put him in the pulpit, in the priesthood of that dialogue, economics, free markets, nothing really personal about God, just kind of like general, oh, maybe. Um, and then pursue money, like this stuff, it's obviously not as nefarious as like someone like truly being like a satanic leader. But at the same time, it's like, it's so obvious. You don't even, there's no, yeah, there's controlled opposition here and there, but really, if someone's not in control of their desires, or they're primarily based in the world, um, worldly needs and wants, the world's already controlling them. You don't need to control them. They are controlled.
Right.
Their desire, their internals are controlling them. It's almost
Right.
like this weird, these concepts of the worm taking over the brain and then operating it. It's like people are all scared of that, right? Oh,
Yeah.
there's gonna be a vaccine that does that, and it's like, it's possible, maybe, I don't know, but what's funny is that it already happens. It happens at the spiritual level first anyway, because that's what the departure or privation of God would be. It would be that you become a conduit for the direct reality you're in, followed by your smells and tastes and feelings, and just going toward it like an amoeba, like just going toward any sensation, really. Oh, no, not that I like that, like this. And so in a way, this concept already exists. It's the absence in the heart, and maybe even in the mind, that it'll just be taken over with whatever is presented in the world. So, you remove God, you'll fill your mind with something else. You fill your body with substance. People fill their bodies with substance because they don't have God in their body, and so it's so clearly, it's already demonstrably true, it's just interesting that sometimes we look at like what's going to happen as if it's there, as if it's new under the sun. Oh,
Right.
Bill Gates is doing this. There's always a way to look at what the fear is externally, what the future may hold, and see that it's already been true. It's already a part of the fall. It's already just some other version of it, some new complex version. And we have technology now, so it's different. It's like, it's not different. It's just the fall. It's
Right.
just,
It's also these people, if you get true believers, then you won't have so many gaffes, right? You won't have like your favorite astronauts and NASA accidentally saying the truth every once in a
Right.
while. If people don't realize they're playing a role, if they're true believers in whatever it is that they're espousing, then that's the perfect person to place in that spot, because they believe their own BS. You don't have to worry that they'll accidentally say the truth sometimes. Like, you like to point out often with, smarter every day and all of these things, that's hilarious, by the way, the stuff when you do like the NASA and the science stuff, it cracks me up. But what was I going to say? I think on a recent podcast, you mentioned something like that. You were approached by some big name people, and they're like, "Oh, when are we going to get you up here? When are you ready?" And if you're that type of person, if that's what's guiding you, that's the perfect way to get you into positions where you're going to be expected to say one thing or the other. Whereas if you're happy with yourself and you're doing your own thing, and you don't let those worldly aspirations or kind of affect you, you're much stronger, and you're truly independent. You're not going to be beholden to these people.
Yeah, totally. It's like it's definitely a concern, just for anybody, where it's like you just see it so often that someone can get co-opted, or someone with something to say then gets muted a little bit, where it's not that noticeable, but the things that they're being muted would really make the difference, maybe.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of aware of it happening. It was just too transparent to me. And it's nothing against any of those entities either, because they're looking for like talent, right? And that they
Sure.
have a thing they're doing. And it's like, and I'm not even certain that in some of the cases I couldn't maintain like it's just an assumption like that I couldn't maintain honesty, but it's more than likely that when you jump on a ship, there are new rules and uniforms and stuff,
Yeah.
even if it's subtle. And I just can't get myself, at least I can't get myself to get excited about that. I might even get myself to do it in some form of another, maybe not like a contract, not like be like, you're now a part of this thing, but I just wasn't excited about it. It just didn't go. And it's funny because I used to be that guy. I used to be like, anything I want to get on, do I'll get on there and whatever. I was such a pleaser. Like I would just be like, whatever it is. But I realized the whole concept of notoriety is such a joke now. It always was, but especially now.
Mhm.
Like the pursuit of any sort of celebrity level notoriety is at this point really before the illusion. You could understand how someone would buy the illusion, maybe in the 80s through the 90s and even up to like maybe early 2000s, but now that's gone. Like even that's gone, which I think is great. Like this concept, the idolatry has been so idolatry, the status of being an idol is now ubiquitous. Like now that it means nothing. Like it's been so easily obtained by so many people for
Mhm.
no reasons, for no real valid reasons. Not that I would promote idolatry, but I mean, you'd think that even in that world that there would be some standards, right? Like, oh, you want to be an idol there. And the only standard is, like you just said, is pursue worldliness, promote worldliness. That's the only standard. You'll be an idol. So Satan has basically overused his card basically recently.
Yeah.
And now it doesn't mean anything. It's like everyone calling you a racist, or the word loses meaning. Idolatry itself is so prominent and so rampant that you can't even tell where it's not. That's how rampant it is. But that's not necessarily bad or good. It's just I think it's a reflection of the world and the departure from God. But to me, it's an opportunity because I'm like, oh, everyone's seeing. A lot of people are seeing that now the celebrity part is gone. Now they have to make the nurses the celebrities now,
Mm.
or whatever the new goal is for the world. They're going to transfer the celebrity, and if the existing celebrities don't work toward that goal, they're not going to be in on the cool table. And so I don't revel in it, but it seems obvious to me that if you're pursuing truth, especially if you're Christian, you can participate on those platforms. And we just all have to be aware of when we're shown magical shiny treats, because that's where the trade happens.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. All right.
What
Well,
kind of art do you do?
I'm a digital artist.
Oh, cool.
So I'm a sculptor by trade. That's what I make my money doing,
Mhm.
doing digital sculpture for software.
Nice.
But I've been drawing ever since I was a little kid. It was always something I was very interested in, drawing, painting, mixed media. But yeah, for the paycheck, I do a lot of digital sculpting and Photoshop work and things like that.
So NASA, you work for NASA?
Yep. I got Don Pettit against the green screen over there.
You could totally submit your resume. I would love a contact who got in, like a friend of mine went into, just because he wanted to, instead of talking about it, he was like, what is this? And he actually went into like Freemasonry, not like seriously, like fly on the wall, like
Mm,
what are we talking about and what's the reality? And
mhm.
lo and behold, obviously at the entry level, it wasn't as insane as the higher levels, but
Yeah.
it was crazy enough where it was like, wow, this is a very ordered way of initiation. It's very
Yes.
ordered and stuff. But so in Hollywood, then did you work for production, like
Yeah.
when you were in Hollywood? Yeah.
Yeah. I've worked on video games and movies for 18 years.
Okay. So you build three-dimensional structures for the environments.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you use like Rhino or all the iterations of that now? Are they?
Um, Max, Maya, ZBrush,
Um,
Blender, Photoshop, a number of other random programs depending on what the project is. Yeah.
So if you work on a video game, depending on how crazy it is, you could be working on just like one side of someone's hair for like months.
More so that would be like a movie.
Uh,
It's really granular at the movie level.
Yeah.
Whereas in video games, like I make creatures, so like I'll make the whole character, the whole creature, or like props or things like this. Video games is a bit broader.
Are you associated still with people who make video games?
Yes, yes, I am.
Did you ever make a video game? I
I've
mean,
made
like together with
many.
people? Yeah.
Yeah, I've worked on, oh, I don't know, like 12 video games.
So with the rate of technology, what would you say, given the art, not complex structural art necessarily like you do, but like, what do you think the budget would be to make a video game now? Like not like a in-depth one, like a fairly busy mobile game.
There's so many factors that go into it. I would say you're probably looking at a couple $1,000,000, maybe like 5 at minimum. Like if you had $5 million, you could probably make a pretty competent video game that would work on mobile devices or would be a PC title.
Yeah.
You could use like a Steam Workshop or one of these smaller platforms to promote your game. It really just determines like the scope. The scope is everything. Like how many artists you'll need, how many programmers you'll need, what's the framework that you're going to need to put it together. Tools have gotten to the point where it is actually a lot more flexible to make games. Now is like the best time to ever have made games ever. But at the same time, one of the things that I think prevents people from making smaller projects is scope. 100% it's scope, because even small ideas like, oh, what if we do it this way now? Oh, what if we make the game like this now? It's like a fractal experience. Like it just blows up.
You can go all these directions and make changes, and then fundamentally you have to change things at the foundation again to make a right
sometimes
turn.
Yeah, sometimes saying something as simple as like, okay, we're gonna like make just like, let's take Diablo for example. Like let's make a Diablo game. Okay, very straightforward, 3/4 angle, characters will be small, environments will be most of the screen. Now we're like, okay, now we want to do a quest system. Well, okay, that wasn't in the original scope. Now we need someone to write all these quests. We need to program it into the game. We need to build all the UI elements. We need all the art. We need the database for all the quests and then the items. And like it just, the thing about video games is it fractals out at a crazy rate. Yeah. So keeping the scope very small, like we're gonna make like Flappy Bird, easy. Now you start putting Flappy Bird in with like costumes. Oh, and now you have a whole new system that blows up. So you went from something small in scope and straightforward that you could be doing with like 2 people to something that's going to require like 5.
I started a game about actually at the beginning of this nonsense pandemic with someone, and it was a game called Liquid Willy. But I ran into potential licensing and issues. Obviously there's more issues of just making the game, but even on top of making a game, which is already monumental, it was like, can I use likeness of Bill Gates? Because the game there was 2 ways you can play the game. One was you're Bill Gates and you're trying to jab people and it's a runner. And the other way is that you're constantly running from people trying to do things to you in this crazy world. And it's also a runner. So it was like left to right, and obviously building out all of the, very rudimentary, almost Super Mario style environments, which aren't too crazy now. Like you can make them essentially the same objects and the same behaviors and just enhance the skins, and suddenly you have a different looking game. And really it's just Super Mario. But
right.
so if they did what they did then, I don't know what year, 80s, it seems entirely possible to make a far less complex game that's funny and culturally relevant. Because
Yeah.
I'm in the position too where, releasing books and stuff, I'm in really good position to make a culturally relevant game specific to certain people and have it just be that's all it is. It's like it's this. It doesn't have to be like super great. Obviously, wouldn't bugginess no, but um, but it So when I think of scope, when you say scope, I'm like, how do you make a an affordable niche game that's actually very precise in who it's attacking, but you don't try to do it in the way they normally campaign games. Like I'm going to go to the game fair and I go get a write up over here. No, it's almost like a creeping subculture
Mhm.
undercurrent kind of thing where it's way more simple.
Do you remember Newgrounds?
No.
Newgrounds was uh in the late 90s, early 2000s. It was like a flash game website.
Uh-huh.
Um, Pretty crude, but very effective. You
Hmm.
could go on there and play like little independent video games. And if you're
Right.
talking about something in the way in like the realm of like Mario, a
Right.
side-scrolling project, like that's good. That's scope. That's thinking scope for sure.
Yeah.
Like when you want to keep things in a nice tight box, you could probably get away with doing a lot more for less doing something like that. And it would probably be less money. Um, and if you're using it like in a browser, so say,
Yeah.
for example, you were to design, Liquid Willie, you wouldn't be able to use Bill Gates. He would get you on that. You'd have to make like a caricature of him, but you could totally do it. Like there's rules for
Parody.
these sorts of things like parody and things. Like you could make a character that we all know is Bill Gates but isn't actually him. um, you could probably get away with that and then do some kind of like flash game or unity is a really powerful little game engine that has a browser based uh, plugin that you could put on your website. So if you got
But
someone
that's
who's
but
clever.
that's those things are not. I mean, you're working in scales and scopes professionally with big game companies. That's your context generally.
Yes, I am. So I'm a digital 3D modeler. Like that's
Yeah.
what my title would be, I suppose. So yeah, I'm working on big PC and console games, and I'm working on a small aspect of it. Like my
Okay.
specialty is creating the 3D models and textures, not
Now,
so much like building
are
the
are
everything
they
else.
using these simpler programs like Unity, or they have their access to like really crazy shit?
These days, things scale so well. So like I've worked at a professional company, like a AAA developer who has used Unity um, to make a larger scale mobile game. But the thing about even if I were using Unreal 5 has the ability to make a little mobile game or a massive AAA open world game. The technology has gotten to the point where like if you know someone who's a good programmer, you can basically do whatever you want with it. You could slice off a bunch of stuff you don't need and make it down, boil it down to just what you need for your project. I think Unity is one of the most flexible ones
Mhm.
because you don't have to get into like you don't necessarily have to get into like all of the bells and whistles of something like Unreal 5.
Yeah, because I had a
Yeah.
concept for a game beyond Liquid Willy, but just the concept for the format of it, which would be it's basically like it's almost like subscription based where it's the same game but the levels are consecutive and episodic. It's not like
Mhm.
it's almost like you're playing a game that's the Netflix TV show that you have to wait for the next thing. And it's delivered that way, but it's short lived and it's comical. So you reduce all the production and fanciness, and it's like someone playing a level of a game. And they'll maybe it's so fun that they play the same level again, and they can't wait for the next level. So you have that aspect of it where you're not giving them enough, and they want more.
Mm.
You don't give them the whole world or anything. And then you produce it, and so it's always self funding in a way. You'd obviously have to start with a certain seed amount to get ahead and maybe get like full 12 episodes as we would call them um ready, but the concept itself seems, especially in my world, in this kind of fun pop culture world, where it's almost like you're delivering an animation, but it's just in the form of a video game, and it could be
Yeah.
very simple. The character walks through something. There's these pop culture references, right? Now that would be a problem because you have to be able to deliver relevant pop culture references, and the time frame and the shelf life of these things are ever diminishing because
Yeah.
you get a
Yeah.
week of something. It's like if I put Will Smith slaps, I want to put that. It's already too late to put it in the
Yeah.
game.
Well, that's you say that's what got South Park to keep going for as long as it did. South Park, I don't know if you ever seen the documentary about it, like Seven
Yeah,
Days
in a
to Air or
week.
something. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. They were able to get the turnaround on that show to happen overnight because it was really simple to begin with, like a very simple art style, very easy to edit, and by the time they moved from actually making things out of paper to putting everything in Maya and animating it all like that, their pipeline, they got it down so fast that they were actually able to create an entire episode of a show in under a week. And that's incredible. So it's not that it's not possible, but it would be something I think you'd have to work towards to be able to do something like that.
Right. I just think it's better when I got into animating. It's like you can make someone laugh with a minute long episode of animation.
Mhm.
Maybe they'll pay for it, maybe they won't. But it's so animation, like gaming, is so it's everywhere and it's saturated. But when someone actually interacts, that changes everything. Like even if it's very simple, like
Yeah.
even if it was as simple as like making a character, like I don't even know. It could be like as simple as making a parody character of someone and pre-coding all the language and voice, and the person gets to interact with them, because that's going to happen anyway with like super AI. But if you can do it in a funny way, I think that'll actually be the competitive part. In other words, the AI now that could make a nearly seamless face of Jordan Peterson, right? And I'm not talking deep fake, like adding the mouth like I do with my buddy. I'm talking about like from scratch now, they could make a very compelling face and voice
Mhm.
now.
Yeah.
But again, just like we were talking about with drawing really well, that weird uncanny valley, amazing application isn't necessarily the value. The value is how does it interact, and can it make you laugh? Does it reference anything funny? How's the writing? The writing.
Mhm.
And that's what we're ultimately dealing with. You probably see that with games. Someone can make the most gorgeous game, and then there's no, what is it? Like there's
Yeah.
no connection. There's no experience, that meaning.
Absolutely. We see that all the time now. Like the technology has gotten to the point where you could make a photorealistic person in a photorealistic world. And if you didn't tell me it was a video game, a lot of times people think it's so realistic, it's so accurate to reality that you may as well be watching a movie.
Yeah.
But I can't think of a game that's done that has made any kind of real splash or has had any real staying power because it's completely empty. It's devoid of meaning. The stories are poorly written by crazy people who are pushing insane, illogical social propaganda into the game.
It
So
just means
you,
that the opportunity is huge right now for
Mhm.
all of
Oh
it. So
yeah,
even if it's gaming or comic books, even or I mean, that's probably why I do kind of good in the comic world. It's there. How many comics are there on the internet? It's not about a following. It's that the fact that I can gather people who value it so like they're so much, even though it's just a small operation and a tight knit community. It's like that must apply to every single field that's lacking meaning, structure, truth, and I feel like that's the missing part in culture. It's like we know that Hollywood needs that. So who's taking that over? It's like Ben Shapiro's going to take that over. It's like, okay, good luck. And now, but that means it's in music, like it's missing in all these sorts of forms. And now it's almost like an opportunity for a new golden age of art.
Yeah, I don't know if you're really into video games, but this game Elden Ring that just came out a few weeks ago, it's a Japanese company called From Software, and then they made a fantasy open world medieval style pseudo horror dark fantasy game, and it's making a huge splash, and people love it because it doesn't have the problems that Western development has. It doesn't have the political social messaging that's overt and all over the place. It doesn't have the same type of design theory that we've seen water down projects to the point where, like, you log into the game, there's stuff all over the screen, go here, press this, jump over it, figure it out. Like, From Software gives you a very open world. It lets you make your decisions. You can do whatever you like. No one's shoving politics down your throat. You know, you don't have a store in the game, so you can put your credit card in and buy all sorts of stuff and microtransaction and bleed you out. You know, it's making such a huge splash, I think, because it's a quality game that goes back to like what it's supposed to be, which is a cool fantasy experience. It's not been so corporatized and like the fun gets sucked out of it, because it's rampant. Like, if you think if music industry and the movie industry is bad, like the video game industry is right behind it. You know, like we're full of the same issues that we see in all of these
It's
places.
so crazy that they don't see, the production people don't see that these fake constructed virtue fences that they're building around their own creations.
A lot of people do. Like, a lot of us do.
Push. I wonder if it's purposeful though to push. Like, I wonder if other countries fund it more so that you have to then outsource even video games to the countries that aren't woke. You know what I mean? Like they're gonna hurt themselves, and I don't know if they know that. Like, you know, because if you want a video game to say something, and then the current woke video game community in America, or America, Canada, maybe, they are like, no, we can't do this. And there's enough production companies that go, no, we're not doing that. Just like printing books. Like, if someone says no to printing my book, like, I have to go elsewhere, obviously. And so why wouldn't that be the case with video games? And, you know, they're going to go to Asia. They're going to go to Korea. They're going to go to, not only they'll be cheaper likely, but they won't say, no, we don't do that. We need a black amputee, black lesbian amputee lead.
Yeah.
Like, they won't say that. They don't care.
They won't. Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting. It's what's interesting about that. And I have to wrap this up, but
yeah.
Is that this wokeness, it's funny because in a way, if we're all honest, we do want some standards.
Yes.
We do want a company to represent standards, and actually implement them. But it's just that who's determining the standards, we don't agree with those standards. They're just these baseless, temporal, nonsensical standards that aren't grounded in anything. It's just in what's trending, you know. And so, and they're evil, you know. If we get down to it, they're just complete inversion. But but we do want standards too. But it's like that's the fun dance in anyone like yourself and myself who's in creativity. We're not. It's so easy to go to no standards, you know. Just let people say what they want, and it's like, also come down on them when they say something that's, you know. And I think that's the battle that's being lost here, is that the modern right is just being like, let them say what they want. And it's like, no, you also have to correct them, just like children. You know, we're all children. So if we're all children, no matter if we're parents or not, we're still children of a higher parent, then we're always going to be seeking correction, even if we pretend we're grown-ups. And we're like, I don't need correction. I'm a grown-up. I'm a grown individual citizen, and I pay taxes. It's like, no, you still need the ultimate parent. So,
yes.
Anyway.
Well, you know, I know you need to wrap up. I want to really appreciate you spending so much time with me this morning. So as in closing, you know, would you mind just talking about what the future holds for JimBob and what the plans are?
Future, I'm now stay at home, so I don't have my day job. My day job is live streaming, selling the things that I make, books. This is Savage Memes Volume 3. prints. I do paintings, all sorts of creativity. I'm getting deeper into music. I got myself a little Scarlett Focusrite little setup mic. So I'll probably start recording more funny, silly, anti-woke music myself, which is, that's a big deal for me, a big challenge. Also, just like a lot of pressure for myself. And so, yeah, doing all creativity stuff and just enjoying being home and moving into full, whatever this is, this full-time sort of live streaming, talking to people on my live stream, maybe get some bigger people to interview, hopefully in the next couple months, set up some bigger interviews with people, maybe from NASA. It'd be fun. Because I think I can do that in a very non-confrontational way.
Mm.
And also just tell them I don't believe them in a non-confrontational way and make it fun and make these people accessible. Like, you know what I mean? There's been a little bit, I kind of want to break that down a little bit. There's been this polarization, which is necessary with worldviews, but at the same time, being able to talk to other people, you just totally despise their worldview, but despising it in a loving way. I want to practice that.
Sounds good, man. Well, right on. I look forward to seeing more of that. I'm a big fan of your work. I try to catch the streams when I'm available. Jim Bob, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time. It was great to chat, and glory to God for all things.
All right. Thank you, man. God bless
Absolutely.
you. All right.
Thank you.